meal at Dom's house, and because Leela was an amazing cook, offered a great meal, a French meal. She was, half French.
Right.
And
Renoir's muse, among other things.
Yeah, that's true. And a favorite of Vogue at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should all be so lucky.
And I think what I learned from Dom was there would be complete chaos in his house.
Mm.
I mean, they did live chaotic lives.
Mm.
I remember once there was, for about a year, Leela kept kind of renovating the house with this kind of renovation that never ended, and it seemed impossible and futile at points. But there were people in the house, there'd be work going on, there were always people visiting. I was over, but Dom was working on a poem, and he was a kind of an island that you could not penetrate. He was absolutely absorbed and working. And he was often like, he wrote 5 columns a week of journalism, but a very high level of journalism. They used to say about his columns that when he sent a column to a newspaper, no editorial correction had to be made, and not a pencil mark or pen correction would be made on the paper that he sent.
Mm-hmm.
And I know why that was. He used to type with one finger. That's how he learned to type. So he had plenty of time to think of a sentence before he typed it. It's before the days of laptops, where the laptop does the thinking for you.
Yes.
It's much too fast.
Yes.
So he would think about it, think the sentence through in his head, and type it with one finger. And there was never a correction in his copy. He became famous for that with editors of newspapers in India, where he sent these columns. And when he was working on a column, again, he was surrounded by this kind of impermeable shield of absorption, complete concentration. And that, for me, was a tremendous thing to learn, that you didn't need an ideal situation, an ideal room, with quietness and a view and all of that. All those are excuses. If you're going to write, you will write wherever you are. And that, I think, was such a valuable lesson to learn. I also remember kind of something that tells you the difference between Bombay and Delhi, and perhaps between then and now. In 1988 or 89, I had I thought, brilliant idea of putting together 6 poets at the main room of the Jehangir Art Gallery. And we would stand in different points of the room and read poems simultaneously, just out of earshot of each other. Read poems simultaneously for 25 minutes. Enough time to read 4 or 5 poems. That was the idea. And the idea was people could come in and go from poet to poet. Listen to a poem. If you don't like it, move on to the next one. Or stay, or whatever. Do you want to answer that call? We had Adil Jasawala, Domarais, Rajit Hoskote, myself, H. Masood Taj, who again became teaches architecture in Canada, left India, and one other poet, I can't remember. We read for about half an hour, and I think we had 5 visitors in that time. And poets get very used to reading to no audience, and we have a kind of a joke poets tell each other. It's a black joke. It's the kind of black joke that doctors tell each other. And poets tell each other the joke, oh, if you're reading, as long as the audience outnumbers the poet, you haven't done too badly. But the thing is, that day, the audience didn't outnumber the poets.
Right.
And it has something to do with Bombay. In Bombay, there's so many things going on. Even if you have 2 or 3 of the greatest poets in the country reading, people won't turn up. If that had been in Delhi, I think we would have got a pretty sizable crew.
Well, we did begin by talking about a city that obliterates its own history. And I think one of the great things for me, hearing you speak about your... Hi, Hash. one of the great, sorry, I just wanted to embarrass Chandrahas, whom I love. One of the great things about hearing you speak about the lessons you learned from other poets, from a community that you had, is that we keep these memories alive for people who read your poetry, who may read your poetry and want and feel that the shock of recognition that you felt when you began to read poetry yourself, and realize that there is really a collective inheritance there.
There is some hope. You're not completely alone. There is life out there.
Yeah, and I love that. For all the singularity of the poetic voice, I think hearing you speak of being disciple to a master, gives us the sense that literature is also a collaborative practice and a historical practice. I really, really want to open this up to questions, but not before I have a chance.
One little addendum to that, which we talked about before. At that time in Bombay, if you were a young poet in your 20s, you chose between two poets. You chose between Nissim Ezekiel or Domarais. They were the kind of eminence grisses of the time. And it was funny, the kind of people who chose Nissim were people like Ranjit, sensible young men. And all the messed up, damaged, dudes chose Dom.
Well, I think I think both their disciples, we are happy to see, have done have done a good job in sort of building legacies of their own.
But it's just good to be alive.
Absolutely. So I'm going to read a poem before perhaps we can open this up and make this a bit more of a collective discussion. And then if we have time, I'd like to read one more or get Jeet to read one more. We can decide on the fly. I'm going to read a short one, also from your last book of poems. These errors are correct. This one begins. Dear Heptanesia. Dear Heptanesia, when you stop on Market Street for more anesthesia, pick up some supplies, brandy, papayas, the Marsh Province buys, and oil for the kerosene lamps. Or else, how will the mailboat find us when the power fails, as it so often does in these wretched swamps? I need a hose, 7-gallon pails, the frangipani's drowning in the heat, a large black brolly, and 2 DVDs, Pennies from Heaven and Pope Pius, his story. When you return, I'll be up waiting, not tired. I like it that you're here, helping me cope. I like to know you're in the room, a little out of range, not saying anything, but letting me know I'm not alone, not entirely.
Quite apt for what we were talking about.
Yes, thank you, Jeet. And thank you. Would anyone like to begin the interrogation of the author? Jeet, you get to pick.
Yes.
Can we pass you a mic?
Don't you think everybody's life is poetry itself?
Of course it is.
Not so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say I'm a big fan of yours, and you said that you were inspired by both there. Is there any other French poet that inspired you? Maybe Rimbaud or someone else?
In fact, Baudelaire opened a kind of a vein, and
Aptly chosen.
a vein that's gushing still. Through him, I discovered Rimbaud, Verlaine, Villon, and many French writers of prose as well.
Tell us a little about these French writers of prose.
Genet, first of all. Our Lady of the Flowers had a tremendous impact on me when I first read it. I was very young. I was 18, and I remember reading this book I remember taking it to college. I was in college in Bombay. I took it to college, and the professor, I was the only student in the English department. There was only one student that year. Nobody else was foolish enough to do English literature. And so the problem with that was I couldn't cut class because they noticed right away. Unfortunate.
Like the poet and his audience.
Right. And I remember taking this book to class, and my teacher, Mrs. Kurian, she was the head of the department, and also very active in the church, Syrian Christian church, was so disappointed that I was carrying a book by Jean Genet. She didn't say anything until the end of the class, and then she said, she gave me a little lecture. She said, it's good to read, but there are some things you must not read because, it's not. And she brought God into it. She brought morality into it.
Right.
She brought right and wrong into it. And I was fascinated to hear this because I realized that literature could have an impact. A book could have an impact far beyond your kind of vision of it. And if it could lead a perfectly fine reader of fiction and poetry to be so upset. I thought
it was doing something right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you follow any regimen at the time of while you are writing a work of fiction, or you are researching for a particular work of fiction which you have in mind? At what stage in your life did you decide to become a writer of fiction or a writer of poetry? If there are one or two things you want to suggest or recommend to an aspiring writer, what would that be?
This is no longer true, but when I was writing Narcopolis, I was living a very disciplined life. In fact, for about 3 or 4 years during that time, I was vegetarian. I was not drinking anything, not even wine. I went to bed fairly early, for me, around midnight. I woke up early. I was exercising. I would go for a run every day in Bandra, in Bombay, where I was living. I lived a very kind of healthy life. I ate well, focused all around the work I was doing. That was all that kept me going. And pretty much a year, not even a year, I think a few months after the book was sent off, it all fell apart. I haven't run in the last 2 years.
So you're saying it took 4 years to
Possible,
Not really, no. It occurred to me that there are entire novels, of one sentence. There's a great book called Dancing Lessons for the Advanced in Age.
Bomil Rabba.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. One sentence for the entire book. Except he cheats. He has semicolons. If you have semicolons in a sentence, that's very easy to do. I tried to write, and I wrote this about 2.5 years into working on the book. So by then I had a very good idea what the book was about. And I think that's when you should write a prologue, because it needs to touch all the bases. And I wrote this 2.5 years into the book. I realized it would be one sentence. I wanted to keep it going for as long as I could without it sounding contrived. And I did this by reading it aloud to myself. But I wrote it very fast. It was written in 4 or 5 days, and it hasn't really been changed since that week. But what it did for me in terms of the book was I realized that the entire book would have long sentences. And I rewrote the book, keeping that idea in mind, keeping the sound of the prologue in mind, and rewrote the book with longer sentences that digressed, that opened up, and where the reader got a sense that the writer didn't know where the sentence would end when he began it. And for me, that was a very exciting way to write. It kept it very fresh, this idea of improvisation, like a musician. And I hope that some of that excitement is conveyed to the reader as well.
Yes, please.
It's interesting to hear about that period of strict discipline for that period of time, and then it sounds like there was a bit of a relapse after that long period of discipline. Was the discipline linked partly to the fact that you were able to survive that experience of the past, and so many people had probably perished or died or overdosed or whatever it was, so it was part of the discipline was linked to being a memorial to all of those people who no longer existed, and it was because of that that you needed to sort of discipline yourself for all these souls who basically had died.
I wish I could say it was something like that, because that's far nobler than the real reason. The real reason was fear. I knew that if I hadn't cleaned up my act and become a little disciplined, I would have died. It was very clear that at that moment I would not have survived. I was diagnosed with a liver condition and so on. So it was just very clear. And I think that was a great wake-up call for me. But, speaking about discipline, it's more than that. It was also the fact that I felt I was engaged in work that was bigger than I was, and that kept me enthusiastic every day, where I didn't feel the need to, dissipate myself in a night of drinking and carousing, for instance, where I felt taken up by something larger than me, and where I wanted to preserve myself for the next morning. And I have to say that for the last 2 years I haven't had that feeling.
Thank you. If we have one last question, thank you.
I believe you know about the way Indian parents and families think about their children's careers.
Sure.
What would you say to a young man who wants to be a writer but is forced into an engineering school and then being asked to study to become a diplomat or a civil servant?
Or a young woman.
Yeah, sure. Well, if that young person is writing poetry, I would say get into the civil service, or do that engineering course, because it's nice to have a little bit of money. If you want to buy something, or if you want to go on a holiday, it's nice to not kind of have to beg your parents, And if you're going to be writing poetry, you will be begging somebody, or marry somebody rich. That's always, in fact, that might be a good idea in any case. Yeah. Unless you're writing the kind of novel Chetan Bhagat is writing, you really have to think about how you're going to live, how you're going to finance yourself. I think if you're young, if you have Indian parents, this doesn't apply to any other country, or very few other countries. If you have Indian parents, it's perfectly honorable to ask them to finance you for a few years while you write a book. If they know you're serious about it, they will give you room and board. That's all you're asking for. A room and food, and maybe a little pocket money. They'll do
it. Yes, please.
One last question.
As an Indian
Absolutely.
parent, you're objecting to that?
As an Indian child, do you have another sort of strategy to suggest? Please, please, please. We'll sort of call a gentle halt to the proceedings with this.
Alright. If I was to look at your diaries, I would like to know how you have structured a novel like Narcobox, because we don't get to know about how novels in this genre are structured. So if you want to tell us how you have structured it, if I could take a look at your notebook, what would it look like?
Nothing like the final structure of Narcopolis. The notebook that I worked with was a handwritten notebook that I kept of travels in India and memories, and also it was also kind of a dream journal. I kept notes of dreams. absolutely no connection with the final form of Narcopolis, which took its shape really in the last 2 years of the 5-year period that I worked on it. It was only in the last 2 years that the shape of it revealed itself to me. And I think often a book is smarter than you are. You know, as a writer, you're so caught up in your own neuroses, your anxieties, your worries for the future and for, you know, some idea of yourself that you really forget, you miss the forest for the trees. And I think it really helps to work on one thing, especially if it's long form fiction, for a long time, because it reveals itself to you. The book reveals itself to you. And I think if it does, it's a wonderful thing, and you should follow where it leads. I think, in fact, it's a very lucky moment in the writing of a book when you feel that it has revealed itself to you.
So you didn't do your chapter structures, you didn't do a flow chart or anything?
Absolutely not. I know there are
you a
writers.
flowchart man?
I wish I was. It would make life easier.
You're more of a flow.
Yeah,
Flow.
yeah, without the chart. Uncharted flowing, more like.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You know, talking to you, Jeet, whether sort of, you know, in person or as we've had the fantastic chance to do in public at this wonderful event, leaves me feeling seaborn, and I really appreciate that. You know, we're both coastal people.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing a little bit of the sea into the auditorium.
I just want to say one little thing. The first time I heard of Supriya Nair was when somebody phoned and said, "May I say a poem of yours on the Mint website?"
Right.
She used to work for Mint, and I was so shocked to be asked this question. I think I was just about to stammer out a reply, which was yes. Because, I mean, I was just thinking, how did this pitch go? She went to the editors of Mint, which is a business journal, and said, "Look, I have a great idea. Why don't we have poems on this business newspaper's website?" Yeah, interesting that you pushed that one through. That's how we first met, and here we are.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite poems, and perhaps we can have you recite it once we're all off stage.
Sure.
Thank you, Jeet. Thank you to everybody who's here.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Your process is very well organized. Power cut just at the end of the show. Sorry about that. I don't know why the generator is not functioning.
I thought you were cutting us off.
No way. Before we leave, I just want to mention that in the gallery we've got, tomorrow it will be the last day, a beautiful exhibition of a French painter, graphist artist, a painting with ink, and you will have beautiful, huge paintings of New York and Tangiers, and referring to William Burroughs, Paul Bosch, all these Beat Generation people, you will see the same ambiance of Tangiers.
Are they up right now?
I can reopen the gallery if you want to see, because it's very connected when you talked about William Burroughs and all these. I think that there is this ambiance in this exhibition. Tomorrow is the last day. Second thing I wanted just to mention that in France we were introduced to Baudelaire when we were 16, 17 at school, right. But when we were 15, your age, 14 or 15, we've already read Les Fleurs du Mal, and they are there. Always, that's our initiation book, I think. Talking about books, your books are for sale outside, Narcopolis, the anthology, and also the last book of poems. So if you are interested, they are just outside. And then it's written, thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Jeet and to Supriya.
Thank you.
And that
thank
was
you,
very interesting, very charming, nice moment. And thank you to the French book office, the French embassy. No, the book. Yeah, was it correct? Yeah. Well, you said no. And to the French embassy, Institut Français. Thank you also, Mitouchi. Thank you, Cécile, from the Alliance Française. And that's it, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The 21st and 22nd of Jan will be the next two events that might interest you.